The crisp October air did little to cool the simmering impatience of Arthur Sterling. He sat at his preferred table at the Gilded Spoon, a small, ridiculously expensive cafe that catered to the city's elite, a place where a single cup of coffee cost more than some people's hourly wage. The table, nestled in a corner by the large bay window, gave him a commanding view of both the meticulously curated interior and the bustling street outside. He liked to watch the little people scurry by, ants on their way to their insignificant anthills, while he, Arthur Sterling, orchestrated the construction of mountains. His phone buzzed on the polished mahogany, a message from Marcus, his junior partner. "The final papers for the Olympus Tower are ready for your signature. The press release is drafted. We're golden." A slow, predatory smile spread across Arthur's face. The Olympus Tower. It was to be his monument, a gleaming phallus of glass and steel that would pierce the city skyline, a permanent testament to his dominance. It was a deal he had pursued with relentless, brutal efficiency, crushing two smaller competitors and leveraging a city councilman into a corner to get the zoning permits. It was the culmination of his life's work, the deal that would finally eclipse the long, suffocating shadow of his father's legacy. He looked up, his good mood instantly evaporating. The waitress was approaching, a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Clara. She was new. He hated new staff. They were inefficient, nervous, and hadn't yet learned the unspoken rule of his patronage: anticipate his needs before he was even aware of them himself. "Your Americano, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft, hesitant. She placed the porcelain cup on its saucer, a slight tremor in her hand causing a tiny droplet of black coffee to splash onto the pristine white ceramic. Arthur stared at the droplet. It was a minuscule imperfection, a flaw in his otherwise perfect morning. It was an affront. "Is this a joke?" he asked, his voice low and cold. Clara's eyes widened. I'm sorry, sir." "This," he said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger next to the offending speck. "This sloppiness. Do you know who I am?" "You're Mr. Sterling," she stammered, her face flushing with a deep, painful red. "I'm so sorry, I'll get you a fresh one right away." She reached for the cup, but Arthur's hand shot out, clamping down on her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, his signet ring digging into her skin. "Don't bother," he sneered, his smile returning, but it was all teeth, devoid of any warmth. "I think this one needs a little adjustment." His gaze was fixed on her cheap polyester uniform, the fabric already strained and worn. With a deliberate, theatrical slowness, he lifted the cup. Clara's eyes followed the movement, a dawning horror filling them. She tried to pull her wrist away, but his grip was like iron. "Please, sir, don't," she whispered, the plea dying in her throat. He tilted the cup. The steaming black liquid cascaded down the front of her white blouse, a dark, ugly stain spreading rapidly across her chest. The heat was immediate, shocking. A choked gasp escaped her lips as she flinched back, the searing pain a blooming flower of agony against her skin. And then Arthur Sterling laughed. It wasn't a chuckle, it was a deep, guttural laugh of pure, unadulterated amusement. He released her wrist, and she stumbled back, clutching her chest, tears welling in her eyes from the pain and the profound, soul-crushing humiliation. The few other patrons in the cafe stared, their morning pastries forgotten. An elderly woman at a nearby table looked on in open-mouthed disgust. Arthur tossed a $100 bill onto the table, the note fluttering down next to the now empty cup. "For the dry cleaning," he said, his voice dripping with condescending mirth. He stood up, adjusted the lapels of his Tom Ford suit, and gave Clara one last, dismissive glance. She was nothing. A bug he had swatted, an inconvenience that had provided a moment's entertainment. He strode out of the Gilded Spoon, his mind already back on the Olympus Tower, the triumphant press conference, the envy in his father's eyes. He didn't give the weeping waitress another thought. He couldn't know that the single cruel act of pouring a cup of coffee was not an end, but a beginning. It was the first tiny crack in the foundation of his empire, a fissure through which his entire world was about to come crashing down. Clara didn't scream. The sound was trapped in her throat, a knot of pain and shame so tight she could barely breathe. She stood frozen for a moment, the hot, sticky coffee soaking through her blouse and bra, the burn beginning to throb with a vicious intensity. The stares of the other customers felt like physical blows, each one a fresh wave of humiliation. Her manager, a weaselly man named Mr. Finch, scurried over, his face a mask of panicked placation. "Clara, what have you done?" he hissed, his eyes darting not to her, but to the $100 bill on Arthur Sterling's table. He poured it on me," she whispered, her voice trembling. The tears she had been holding back finally broke free, tracing hot paths down her cheeks. Mr. Finch snatched the bill from the table. "Mr. Sterling is our most important customer. He wouldn't do something like that without provocation. You must have upset him." He didn't even look at the massive dark stain on her uniform or the reddening skin beneath it. He saw only a disruption, a problem that threatened his bottom line. "I didn't do anything," she insisted, the injustice of it all a fresh stab of pain. "I just brought him his coffee." "Go to the back. Clean yourself up," he ordered, his voice sharp and dismissive. He turned to the other patrons, his face contorting into a sycophantic smile. "Apologies for the disturbance, everyone. Everything is under control." In the cramped, grimy staff bathroom, Clara peeled the sodden blouse away from her skin. A raw, angry red patch was already forming on her chest and collarbone, tender to the touch. She splashed cold water on it, wincing as the droplets hit the sensitive flesh. But the physical pain was a dull echo compared to the emotional wound. She wasn't just a waitress, she was a person, a mother. She was Clara Bennett, and she had a 7-year-old daughter named Lily waiting for her at home. A little girl who thought her mother was the strongest person in the world. And Arthur Sterling had treated her like she was less than human. Like garbage. The memory of his laugh, cold and cruel, echoed in her ears. He had enjoyed it. He had relished her pain. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her eyes were puffy, her face streaked with cheap mascara. The uniform, a symbol of a job she desperately needed, was ruined. And in that moment, something inside her snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, seismic shift. She was done. Done being invisible. Done being treated like dirt for a pittance that barely covered rent and groceries. She walked out of the bathroom, her head held high. She strode past Mr. Finch, who was fawning over the elderly woman who had witnessed the event, likely trying to smooth things over. "Clara, where do you think you're going? Your shift isn't over," he called after her. She didn't turn around. She didn't say a word. She simply untied her stained apron, dropped it onto the floor, and walked out the front door of the Gilded Spoon, the little bell above it chiming her departure. The cold October air hit her burned skin, and for the first time that day, it felt like a relief. She had no job, no plan, and less than $200 in her bank account. But as she walked away from the cafe, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Free. Her journey home on the bus was a blur of shame and resolve. She kept her jacket zipped up to her chin, hiding the stain. Every person who glanced her way felt like an accuser. When she finally unlocked the door to her tiny third-floor apartment, the scent of cinnamon and the sound of cartoons greeted her. "Mommy!" Lily came running from the living room, her pigtails bouncing. She wrapped her little arms around Clara's legs. "You're home early." Clara forced a smile, blinking back a fresh wave of tears. She knelt down, hugging her daughter tightly, burying her face in Lily's hair. "I just missed my best girl," she murmured. Later that evening, after putting Lily to bed with a story about a brave knight who fought a dragon made of shadows, Clara sat alone in her small kitchen. She treated her burn with a cheap ointment, the sting a constant reminder of the day's events. The $100 bill Sterling had thrown on the table was still in her pocket. It felt tainted, like blood money. She smoothed it out on the worn linoleum tabletop. It wasn't enough to fix anything. It was an insult. She thought about her grandmother who had taught her how to bake. She remembered the warmth of the kitchen, the magic of turning flour, sugar, and butter into something that made people happy. It was the one thing she was truly good at, the one thing that had ever brought her joy. But it wasn't a career. It was a dream, a fantasy for people who had safety nets and savings accounts, not for single mothers living paycheck to paycheck. Staring at the crisp bill under the dim kitchen light, a reckless idea began to form. It was crazy. It was irresponsible. But what other choice did she have? She couldn't go back to waitressing, not now. The thought of serving another arrogant man like Arthur Sterling made her stomach churn. She picked up the $100 bill. It wasn't just money, it was a catalyst. It was the seed of an idea. He had meant it as an insult, a final act of dominance. But maybe, just maybe, she could turn his poison into her cure. She would use his filthy money to build something for herself, for Lily, something pure and good. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was hers. And it was a start. Arthur Sterling signed the final document with a flourish, the nib of his Mont Blanc pen scratching satisfyingly against the thick, expensive paper. The Olympus Tower was officially his. He pushed the folder across the vast glass-topped desk towards Marcus Vance. "It's done," Arthur said, leaning back in his leather throne of a chair. The view from his office on the 80th floor of Sterling Tower was breathtaking, the city sprawling beneath him like a circuit board he controlled. "Call the press. I want the announcement on every major network by noon." "Already on it, Arthur," Marcus said, his smile a little too wide, his eyes a little too eager. He was a chameleon, perfectly adapting his demeanor to suit Arthur's mood. Today it was celebratory sycophancy. "This is monumental. You've redrawn the city's skyline. Your father will have to eat his words." The mention of his father soured Arthur's triumphant mood. Robert Sterling, the founder of Sterling Holdings, was a relic from a bygone era. He spoke of things like integrity and community responsibility. He had built the company through handshake deals and cautious, steady growth. Arthur saw it as weakness. He had taken his father's solid but unremarkable company and transformed it into a juggernaut through aggressive acquisitions, hostile takeovers, and a complete disregard for the sentimental nonsense his father preached. That evening, he went to his father's penthouse for their customary strained weekly dinner. Robert Sterling was in his late 70s, his frame still imposing, but his eyes holding a weary disappointment that was almost always directed at his son. "I saw the news," Robert said, swirling the amber liquid in his whiskey glass. They sat in his study, surrounded by old books and older principles. "The Olympus Tower. You strong-armed the city, bankrupted Henderson Developments, and bulldozed a historic landmark to make it happen." "I built an icon, father," Arthur countered, his voice sharp. "Henderson was failing. The landmark was a derelict fire trap. I created thousands of jobs and added billions in value to this city. You should be proud." "Proud?" Robert let out a short, bitter laugh. "You build on foundations of sand, Arthur. Your deals are all leverage and loopholes. You create nothing of real value. You just move money around, leaving a trail of broken people behind you. A man is measured by his character, not the height of his buildings." "Character doesn't get you a seat at the table," Arthur scoffed, pouring his own drink. "Power does. And I have more of it than anyone in this city." "Power is fleeting," Robert said, his voice quiet and grave. "And the powerful have the furthest to fall. I hope for your sake that you've checked every single stone in that sandy foundation of yours, because when the tide comes in, men like you drown." Arthur dismissed the warning with a wave of his hand. It was the same lecture he'd been hearing for years. His father was an old man who didn't understand the new world. He left the dinner feeling annoyed but unshaken, returning to his own, even more opulent penthouse overlooking the park. He forgot the conversation almost immediately, his mind filled with plans for the lavish groundbreaking ceremony. He thought of the waitress from that morning only once, a fleeting image of her tear-streaked face, and it brought a faint, cruel smile to his lips. She, like his father, like Henderson Developments, was just another piece of insignificant debris left in the wake of his ascent. The next 2 weeks were a blur of media interviews, celebratory dinners, and fawning praise from the city's elite. The Olympus Tower was the talk of the town, and Arthur Sterling was its king. He felt invincible, untouchable. He was on top of the world, and the view was spectacular. The first tremor came on a Tuesday morning. It arrived not as a dramatic explosion, but as a quiet email from the Primary Investment Group, a powerful consortium based in Zurich. The subject line was innocuous. Urgent query re. Environmental Impact Report, Section 7B. Arthur forwarded it to Marcus. "Handle this. It's clerical nonsense." Marcus's reply was a little too quick. "On it. Just a formality." But it wasn't a formality. The next day, a follow-up email arrived, its tone significantly colder. It seemed the geological surveys included in the environmental report were incomplete. In fact, one of the key soil stability assessments, the one for the northwest corner of the foundation, appeared to have been signed by a Dr. Alastair Finch, a geologist who, upon a cursory check by the Swiss, had apparently died 2 years prior. Arthur's blood ran cold. He stormed into Marcus's office, slamming a printout of the email onto his desk. "What the hell is this?" Marcus paled, sweat beading on his forehead. It's a mistake. A typo. The name must be similar." "A typo?" Arthur roared, his voice echoing through the glass-walled office. "They're implying the report was forged, you idiot. This is the cornerstone of the entire financial structure. Did you handle this? Did you personally verify every document?" "Of course. My team did," Marcus stammered, shuffling papers on his desk, avoiding Arthur's gaze. "We outsourced some of the peripheral surveys to a third-party contractor to expedite things. They must have made an error. I'll fix it." But it was too late to fix. The Swiss investors weren't fools. They had been looking for an excuse, a way to renegotiate their terms, and Marcus had handed them a nuclear weapon. They didn't just want to renegotiate, they launched a full-scale independent audit of the entire Olympus Tower project portfolio. The tide his father had warned him about wasn't just coming in. It was a tsunami, and Arthur Sterling was standing right on the beach, watching the water recede from the shore, blissfully unaware of the towering wave of destruction gathering on the horizon. The $100 sat on Clara's kitchen table for 2 days. A silent dare. On the third day, she made a decision. She took $70 and went to a bulk supply store. She bought professional-grade flour, Belgian chocolate, vanilla beans, yeast, and high-fat European butter. The remaining $30 went towards simple cardboard boxes and parchment paper. Her apartment kitchen was tiny, but it was clean. For the next 48 hours, she worked in a feverish haze, fueled by coffee and sheer determination. She baked what she knew best, what her grandmother had taught her: sourdough bread, its crust crackling and its crumb airy and tender. Decadent chocolate lava cakes that oozed a molten core. Delicate lemon-lavender shortbread that melted in the mouth. Her apartment filled with the intoxicating aromas of her craft. It was the first time the small space had felt like a home and not just a holding cell. Lily watched, mesmerized, occasionally being allowed to stir a bowl or sprinkle sugar. "It smells like heaven, Mommy," she said, her eyes wide. When she was done, Clara had a small but impressive inventory. The problem was how to sell it. She didn't have a shop or a license. She took a picture of the spread with her old phone. The lighting terrible, the angle awkward. She posted it on a neighborhood social media page, a place usually reserved for complaining about lost cats and noisy neighbors. She wrote a simple message. "Hello, my name is Clara. I'm a local mom who has recently lost my job. I love to bake. If anyone is interested in homemade sourdough, lava cakes, or shortbread, please let me know. I can deliver locally. Thank you for your time." She hit post and held her breath, expecting nothing but silence, or perhaps a comment from a troll. For hours there was nothing. Her heart sank. It was a stupid idea, a waste of money she didn't have. She was about to delete the post in embarrassment when her phone pinged. A message from a woman named Eleanor Vance. "That shortbread looks divine. My husband and I would love to try a box. And a loaf of that sourdough, please. Can you deliver to the corner of Elm and Oak?" Clara's hands trembled as she typed a reply. An hour later, she was standing on a street corner, handing a neatly packed box to a kind-faced woman with silver hair. It was the elderly woman from the cafe, the one who had watched Arthur Sterling humiliate her with a look of pure disgust. "My dear," Eleanor said, her eyes full of warmth and recognition, "I'm so glad I found you. What that dreadful man did was unforgivable." She pressed 2 $50 bills into Clara's hand. "Keep the change. And please, put me down for a standing order every week." That single act of kindness was like a dam breaking. Eleanor posted a glowing review on the neighborhood page, complete with a much better photo of the shortbread. "The best I've had outside of Scotland, and made by a lovely local woman. Let's support our own." The orders started as a trickle, then became a steady stream. A dad who wanted a special cake for his son's birthday. A young couple who ordered bread every other day. An office manager who wanted 24 cookies for a meeting. Clara was run off her feet. She baked late into the night and made deliveries on foot all over the neighborhood during the day, often with Lily in tow. It was exhausting, back-breaking work, but it was hers. Every dollar she earned felt clean, honest. She saved every penny, reinvesting in better ingredients and equipment. She bought a used stand mixer, which felt like a luxury limousine. She started a proper business page with better photos. She called her fledgling enterprise Lily's Loaf, after her daughter and her signature sourdough. One afternoon, a local food blogger, a young man with an influential online following, ordered a lava cake on a whim. He was so impressed that he wrote a feature piece on her, a classic underdog story titled, "From Spilled Coffee to Sweet Success, The Home Baker, Taking the City by Storm." The story went viral overnight. Suddenly, Clara's phone was ringing off the hook. Cafes and restaurants wanted to carry her bread. People from across the city wanted to place orders. She was completely overwhelmed, but in the best possible way. The $70 from Arthur Sterling's insult had multiplied 100-fold, then 1,000-fold. She found a small, vacant storefront for rent on a quiet side street. It was run down, the windows grimy and the paint peeling, but it had a proper commercial kitchen in the back. The rent was steep, a terrifying leap of faith, but with a small business loan secured by her growing list of commercial clients, she signed the lease. While Arthur Sterling's world was being audited and investigated, while his empire of sand was beginning to crumble under the weight of its own corruption, Clara Bennett was laying a foundation of her own. It wasn't built with steel and glass, but with flour, sugar, and an unbreakable spirit. She was building it brick by brick, loaf by loaf, on a quiet street corner, a world away from the gleaming towers of power and greed. The audit was a bloodbath. The Forge Geological Survey was just the tip of the iceberg. The auditors, a ruthless team from Zurich, descended upon Sterling Holdings with the precision of surgeons and the morals of sharks. They uncovered a systematic pattern of corruption that went back years, all of it orchestrated by Marcus Vance under Arthur's implicit, if not direct, command. There were inflated invoices, shell corporations used for kickbacks, illegal campaign contributions to city officials, and a dozen other white-collar crimes. Marcus had been building his own lifeboat for years, siphoning off millions from the company's vast cash flows, and he had covered his tracks by ensuring Arthur's signature was on all the most incriminating documents. Arthur had been so arrogant, so focused on the big picture, that he'd signed whatever Marcus put in front of him without a second thought. The Swiss investors didn't just pull their funding, they sued. They sued for fraud, for breach of contract, for racketeering. The news hit the financial world like a thunderclap. The stock price of Sterling Holdings, once a titan of the market, plummeted. It lost 80% of its value in a single day of trading. Arthur was in a state of panicked denial. "This is a hostile attack," he screamed at his legal team. "It's a market manipulation. We countersue. We fight." But there was nothing to fight with. The evidence was irrefutable. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched its own investigation. The district attorney's office convened a grand jury. The Olympus Tower, his monument, became a symbol of his hubris and corruption. A half-finished skeleton of steel rusting in the autumn rain. He tried to call Marcus, but the number was disconnected. Marcus had vanished. A check of flight record showed he had taken a one-way flight to a country with no extradition treaty. His accounts likely filled with the millions he had embezzled. He had left Arthur to take the fall. Desperate, Arthur turned to the one person he had spent his life trying to best, his father. He went to Robert Sterling's penthouse, not with arrogance, but with a plea. "You have to help me," he begged, his voice cracking. "The company, it's collapsing. They're going to indict me. You have to use your connections, call in your old favors." Robert looked at his son, his face etched with a profound, weary sadness. "There are no favors to call in for this, Arthur. This isn't a business deal gone sour. This is a rot, a cancer that you allowed to grow right under your nose because you were too greedy and too proud to pay attention." "But it was Marcus," Arthur insisted, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. He did it all. He framed me. Did he hold a gun to your head and force you to sign those documents? Robert asked quietly. Did he force you to build your empire on lies and intimidation? No, he was merely the architect of a ruin you designed yourself. You wanted to be a king, Arthur. You surrounded yourself with yes men and sycophants, and you are shocked that one of them betrayed you for his own gain. You taught him how. So you won't help me, Arthur whispered, the reality of his situation finally crashing down on him. I cannot, Robert said, his voice heavy with finality. Sterling Holdings, the company I built, is finished. You've destroyed it. I will use what remains of my personal fortune to see that the employees and smaller creditors are paid what they are owed. But for you, there is nothing. You are on your own. The fall was swift and brutal. The company was forced into Chapter 7 bankruptcy, its assets to be liquidated. The creditors, led by the vengeful Swiss consortium, moved to seize everything. Arthur's bank accounts were frozen. His portfolio of stocks and bonds was wiped out. The fleet of luxury cars was repossessed. And finally, the eviction notice came for his penthouse. He was given 24 hours to vacate the premises. He wandered through the vast empty rooms, the opulent furniture and priceless art, now just assets to be catalogued and sold. He packed a single suitcase with a few designer suits, the armor of a life that no longer existed, and some personal effects. As he stood in the marble foyer for the last time, a repo man was changing the lock on the door. Arthur Sterling, the man who had owned the sky, walked out onto the street with a suitcase in his hand and less than $500 in his pocket. He looked up at the towers of the city, the kingdom he had lost. He was no longer a king. He was just another ant, scurrying on the pavement. And for the first time in his life, he was utterly, terrifyingly alone. While Arthur's world imploded, Clara's was blooming. The grand opening of Lily's Loaf was a small, wonderful affair. The little shop was filled with the scent of fresh bread and brewing coffee. Eleanor Vance and her husband were the first customers, buying enough baked goods to feed a small army. The local news station, catching wind of the food blogger's story, sent a camera crew to do a human interest piece. Clara, awkward and shy in front of the camera, simply spoke from the heart. She talked about her love for baking, the joy of creating something with her hands, and her desire to build a better life for her daughter. She never once mentioned Arthur Sterling or the incident at the Gilded Spoon. She didn't need to. Her success was its own quiet, powerful statement. The shop became a neighborhood hub. People came for the bread, but stayed for the warmth and the sense of community. Clara hired her first employee, a cheerful young woman from the neighborhood, to help manage the counter. She worked from dawn until long after dusk, but it was a happy exhaustion. She would come home, smelling of sugar and yeast, and scoop a sleeping Lily into her arms, feeling a sense of peace and security she had never known. She paid her bills on time. She had health insurance. She was even able to start a small college fund for Lily. These were small victories, but to her they felt like winning a war. One crisp December afternoon, a few weeks before Christmas, a well-dressed elderly man walked into the shop. Clara recognized him instantly from the society pages. It was Robert Sterling. Her heart gave a little jolt of fear. Had he come to threaten her? To complain? He approached the counter slowly, his eyes taking in the cozy, bustling shop. "Are you Clara Bennett?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Yes," she said, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. He didn't smile, but his eyes were not unkind. "My name is Robert Sterling." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. "I believe you had an unfortunate encounter with my son some months ago." Clara just nodded, unsure what to say. "I read about your shop in the news," he continued, gesturing around the room. This is impressive. You've built something real here, something of value." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it on the counter. "I came to apologize on behalf of my family. What Arthur did was inexcusable. There is no excuse for cruelty." Clara looked at the envelope. It was undoubtedly full of money. A few months ago, she would have snatched it up without a second thought. But now, things were different. "I appreciate that, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But I can't accept that." Robert looked surprised. "Why not? It's the least I can do." "Because I don't need it," Clara said, and the truth of that statement filled her with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I built this place with my own 2 hands. I don't want his money or your money tainting it. The best apology would be for your son to understand what he did. But I don't think he's capable of that." Robert Sterling looked at her for a long moment, a flicker of something, respect, perhaps even admiration, in his old eyes. He picked up the envelope. "You are right, of course," he said quietly. He then pointed to a tray of cinnamon rolls. "In that case, may I buy one of those? They smell magnificent." Clara served him the cinnamon roll, and he paid with a $20 bill, telling her to keep the change. He ate it by the window, watching the people go by. Before he left, he turned to her one last time. "My son. He has lost everything. His company, his fortune, his name. I fear he is about to learn some very hard lessons." He walked out of the shop, leaving Clara with a strange mix of emotions. There was no triumph, no sense of victory in hearing about Arthur's downfall. There was just a quiet, somber sense of balance being restored to the universe. She turned back to her work, shaping a mound of dough on her flowered countertop, her focus on the life she was building, not the one that had been destroyed. The $500 didn't last long. A week in a cheap, bug-infested motel. A few greasy meals from diners, and then it was gone. Arthur Sterling found himself on the street. Truly on the street. The first night was the worst. He tried to sleep on a park bench, but the December cold seeped into his bones, a deep, relentless chill he had never experienced. His expensive suit was a pathetic defense against the biting wind. The city he once ruled now seemed alien and hostile, its nighttime sounds, the wail of sirens, the rumble of garbage trucks, the shouts of drunks, a terrifying symphony of his new reality. The days were a blur of shame and desperation. He, who had dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, now rummaged through trash cans behind bakeries and fast food joints, his hunger a gnawing beast in his belly. He, who had commanded boardrooms, now tried to make himself invisible on street corners, averting his eyes from the very people he used to look down upon from his penthouse window. His appearance deteriorated rapidly. His suit became stained and torn. His face, once clean-shaven and confident, was now covered in a patchy, dirty beard. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, were now hollowed out with fear and despair. He learned the cruel calculus of homelessness, the constant search for warmth, for a safe place to sleep, for a morsel of food, for a bathroom that wasn't locked. He saw people he knew, former colleagues and business rivals, striding down the sidewalk in their warm overcoats, talking on their phones, completely oblivious to the ragged figure huddled in a doorway just feet away. He was invisible. The realization was more crushing than the loss of his fortune. He hadn't just lost his money, he had lost his identity. Without the name Sterling and the power it conferred, he was no one. A ghost haunting the streets of his former kingdom. One afternoon, desperate and shivering, he swallowed his pride and went to a homeless shelter. The place was crowded, chaotic, and smelled of disinfectant and despair. He stood in line for a bowl of thin, watery soup, his stomach churning with a mixture of hunger and humiliation. A man standing next to him, his face a roadmap of hard living, looked at Arthur's ruined suit. "You're new to this, ain't ya?" the man said, his voice raspy. "High flyer, were ya? A banker? Lawyer?" Arthur just stared into his soup, unable to speak. "Don't worry," the man continued, taking a loud slurp from his bowl. "The street's a great equalizer. We're all the same down here. Just hungry." The words hit Arthur with the force of a physical blow. He had spent his entire life believing he was different, better, superior. Now he was just like everyone else in this room, broken, destitute, and utterly anonymous. He couldn't stay. The sheer proximity to so many other failures, so many other broken people, was more than his shattered ego could bear. He left the shelter, choosing the cold, lonely anonymity of the street over the shared misery within. He wandered for days, his mind a fog of self-pity and rage. He blamed Marcus. He blamed his father. He blamed the Swiss investors. He never once blamed himself. The world had conspired against him, had unfairly stripped him of his birthright. His desperation grew, devolving into something primal. The sophisticated veneer of Arthur Sterling was stripped away layer by layer, revealing the raw, panicked animal beneath. Hunger was his only master now. It drove him, tormented him, and eroded the last vestiges of his pride. He would do anything for a piece of bread. He would beg, he would grovel, he would howl at the moon if he thought it would earn him a meal. The man who once laughed at a waitress for a spilled drop of coffee was now on the verge of barking like a dog for a crust. It was the week before Christmas. A light, picturesque snow was falling, dusting the city in a soft white blanket. Inside Lily's loaf, it was an oasis of warmth and cheer. The air was thick with the scent of gingerbread and spiced cider. A small Christmas tree twinkled in the corner, and the shop was filled with customers picking up holiday orders. Clara, wearing a flour-dusted apron with a snowman on it, moved with a happy, efficient grace, boxing up cakes and tying ribbons on bags of cookies. She was handing a large order to Eleanor Vance when she saw him. Through the large, slightly fogged-up front window, a figure was stumbling down the street. He was a scarecrow of a man, thin and ragged, his movements unsteady. He wore the tattered remains of what might have once been an expensive overcoat, now filthy and several sizes too large. His face was gaunt, covered in a matted beard, his eyes wild and desperate. He paused in front of the shop, his gaze fixed on the trays of fresh bread and pastries displayed in the window. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Her hands froze mid-ribbon. It couldn't be. But even through the grime and the desperation, there was no mistaking the sharp line of that jaw, the arrogant set of that brow, now furrowed in misery. It was Arthur Sterling. He pressed his face against the cold glass, his breath fogging a small circle. His eyes, sunken and dark, devoured the sight of the food. He looked like a starving wolf staring at a flock of sheep. He didn't seem to see the people inside, only the sustenance he craved. Eleanor followed Clara's gaze. "Good heavens," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Is that—" Clara simply nodded, her mind reeling. He looked broken. Destroyed. The powerful, cruel man who had deliberately poured scalding coffee on her was gone. In his place was this pathetic, shivering creature, a husk of a human being. A part of her, a dark, vengeful part she didn't know she had, felt a surge of satisfaction. This was justice. This was karma. He was getting what he deserved. But as she watched him, another feeling began to surface, one that surprised her. It was pity. He was no longer a monster. He was just a cold, hungry man. He pushed the door open, the little bell chiming his arrival. A blast of cold, wet air followed him in. The cheerful chatter in the shop died down as customers turned to stare at the disheveled figure. He seemed to shrink under their gazes, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. He didn't look at Clara. His eyes were locked on a basket of day-old bread rolls near the counter, marked for half price. He shuffled forward, his movements painful and slow. He fumbled in his pocket, his dirt-caked fingers pulling out a few meager coins. He counted them, his lips moving silently. It clearly wasn't enough. He looked up, his eyes finally meeting Clara's. For a moment there was no recognition. He saw only a woman behind a counter, a gatekeeper to the food he desperately needed. "Please," he rasped, his voice a dry, cracking whisper, unrecognizable from the confident baritone she remembered. "Anything, a piece of bread. Whatever you're going to throw out. I'm so hungry." His plea was stripped of all artifice, all pride. It was the raw, desperate cry of a starving man. This was his version of barking for mercy. His body was trembling, from the cold, from hunger, from the sheer effort of asking for help. And in that moment, Clara recognized him completely. Not just his face, but his soul. She saw the terrified, hollowed-out core of the man, stripped of all his power and money, and she knew what she had to do. She looked past him to her other customers. "Could you all give me just a moment?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. They nodded, their faces a mixture of shock and curiosity. She walked around the counter. Arthur flinched back, as if expecting a blow. She didn't say his name. She didn't acknowledge that she knew who he was. To do so would be another form of cruelty, a public shaming he was in no condition to endure. She simply took a large, warm sourdough loaf from the rack. She grabbed a paper bag and placed the loaf inside. Then she added 2 of the cinnamon rolls her father had enjoyed so much, and a small container of hot soup she had made for her own lunch. She held the bag out to him. He stared at it, then at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. He slowly reached out a trembling hand and took the bag, clutching it to his chest like a priceless treasure. Thank you," he stammered, tears welling in his sunken eyes and freezing on his dirty cheeks. He didn't know who she was. She was just a kind stranger, an angel of mercy in a warm, fragrant shop. He turned without another word and stumbled back out into the snow, disappearing into the twilight. Clara watched him go, then turned back to her stunned customers. Eleanor Vance walked up to her and placed a gentle hand on her arm. "That was the kindest thing I have ever seen," she said, her own eyes misty. Clara gave a small, sad smile. "It's Christmas," she said softly. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't even about pity, not really. It was about her. It was a final, quiet declaration that she would not be defined by his cruelty. He had tried to diminish her, to make her feel as small and worthless as he secretly felt himself. But he had failed. Her revenge wasn't in seeing him destroyed. It was in her own refusal to be destroyed. It was in the simple, powerful act of meeting his hatred, not with more hatred, but with a humanity he himself had lost long ago. She turned back to the counter, the scent of bread and cinnamon filling the air, and got back to work, the master of her own small, warm, and wonderful world.